Thanks everyone for joining on this beautiful evening. Just a quick brief summary about why we wanted to do this, but I found that a lot of my friends and I just started talking about buying real estate, and of course, as we're getting older and making more income, people start thinking about buying property as one of the next goals in their lives. So I recently went through this process myself, and I realized, as you're going through the first time with anything, it can be pretty overwhelming or difficult to navigate, especially if you've never done it before. So Lucas was like pretty helpful in that process. So I just thought that it'd be beneficial to kind of do a seminar to share this knowledge with everybody else. And I think the best thing you can do is to learn as much as you can and educate yourself, so that should an opportunity come up, you'll be more prepared to take advantage of it. So Lucas, I couldn't ask for a better person to put on this presentation, because he's super passionate about real estate. He's doing his master's in real estate at Schulich, and he has a pretty incredible story, because not many people know this, but he was diagnosed with cancer earlier this year. And literally this guy was closing real estate deals while he was in chemotherapy sessions. So pretty crazy story. Good news is that he's all recovered now, and he's back on his feet and back on the real estate hustle. So I hope you guys,
your hair looks great.
Yeah, woo!
Thanks. Thank you.
So I hope
Love
you
you,
guys
man.
learned something.
Thanks, man.
And then that it's going to be a beneficial session for everyone. So go for it,
Got
Lucas.
it. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, Kathy, for the great introduction. Feeling great, after post-chemo treatment. Gained some COVID weight, so that definitely helped as well. And so Kathy kind of reached out to me on a real estate purchase she was doing, and like many first-time home buyers, had a lot of questions. So we kind of decided that it'd be good to host a seminar on kind of the common things that people ask when they're buying their first home, things to look out for. And so you're just much more well prepared when you actually want to go ahead and make that transaction. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a bit of a slide deck. I'll try to exit occasionally, and I think a bunch of you are muted right now just to make the stream easier. But you can just unmute yourself if you have a question. We want to try to make it as interactive as possible. And you can feel free to interrupt, and then I can address your point and then keep moving on. Okay. Okay, is it good? Can you see my screen?
Yep, all good.
Okay, so this is called First Time Home Buyer, of course, because this is the topic we'll be addressing, and it's a guide to navigating in the Toronto real estate market. So first of all, I just wanted to let everyone know that Kathy and I planned on hosting this last month, but then I think it happened to overrule on some other date, and then we had to delay it. So I actually had this original presentation for you guys, giving you what the market was like in April and May. And then the June results came out, which kind of changed the presentation a bit. So I want to give you guys a heads up on what's been going on in the market. I'll try to keep it really simple. I won't dive too much on it, again, because this isn't really a market update seminar. It's more of a first-time home buyer seminar. But here we go. So, of course, we have to address COVID-19, which is affecting everyone right now. And how has that affected the real estate market? Well, okay, so in April and May, it was a very unprecedented time, causing market irregularities. I'm sure many of you know that in Toronto, we've kind of just seen nonstop, the market keeps going up and up and up and up. And then in April and May, this is when we saw prices just drop dramatically, kind of wiping out the gains almost that we made over the previous year. And to a lot of people, this was concerning. But I will talk more about how in June, this kind of has changed the outlook. So again, in April and May, the listings had decreased dramatically. You can imagine that a lot of people that were looking to sell their house purposely put it on pause because they didn't want random people walking into their house. Possibly they had COVID-19 and they wouldn't want people touching, all the doorknobs, going into their bedrooms and whatnot. So the listings just went down like crazy. So the seller side was kind of really hit. And then on the buyer side, people were just nervous. They didn't really want to buy because they're uncertain of where the market was heading. The stock market had gone down earlier. I think it was in March, April, and then real estate. People were very uncertain about that as well. And thus the price had dropped due to less demand. There's massive unemployment, so you can imagine that really affects real estate demand. Less immigration, less international students. And then another really big thing was that Airbnb was banned in Toronto, and all other short-term rentals. So essentially what had happened was a bunch of these short-term rentals or Airbnb buildings had converted to long-term rentals, which kind of caused a shock in the supply system, and then subsequently dropped the rental prices. And then that was where my initial presentation was that in a really weird spot. And then June happened, the June statistics came out, and basically, we're back where we were before. The number of sales, the number of listings, and the resale prices are now even higher than they were pre-COVID. Airbnb, short-term rentals, now allowed again in Toronto. So, but I would take this with a grain of salt, because even though they're allowed, a lot of people aren't staying at Airbnbs because international travel has become quite limited and people have to quarantine. So, people coming to Canada and renting Airbnbs, demand's still not there. So this one doesn't really affect it as much. But I think the biggest thing is that, as you may have heard, the Fed has dropped the interest rates. Canada has dropped their interest rates as well. And this has become sort of like rocket fuel for buying properties, investing in the stock markets. And what you see now is just everything is now going back up. People are having bidding wars on properties again, and we're exactly kind of back to where we were before. So I brought up a couple of charts, which are, I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. One sec. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen just to see if anyone has questions. Okay, no questions so far. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so these are directly from the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board. I didn't make these charts up, so you can actually see some data on the market that's been going on. I put these arrows here so you can kind of refer to the orange, which is 2020, and you can see what the new listings have been like. So new sellers on the market for the past few months. So we started in March. In March we had around 15,000 new listings. Then COVID hit in the later half of March. And then in April, you can see this is dramatically wiped down to around, like, let's call it 6,000 listings, new listings. May, you had to pick up a bit, rise up to almost 10,000 listings. And then in June, now like it has exceeded the March amount of listings, up over around 16 or 17,000. So you might think, okay, well, a lot of people are selling their property now, but does that mean the price has gone up? So if we look at the second chart, we see the sales has followed, again, a very similar trajectory. You had March, you had a lot of sales. In April, it tanked. May, it rose. And then June, now again, we're even higher than in March. I think this chart might be the easiest for everyone to understand. This is the average resale home price. So again, we have referred to the orange bars. In March, we had around 900,000 as the average resale price. Saw a crazy 10% drop in prices going into April. And then prices recovered in May to 850. And then now in June, we have now exceeded pre-COVID prices, now going around like 910,000 920,000 average resale home price. So, a lot of people say that the real estate market is a lagging indicator behind the stock market, and it seems to have followed suit because you had the stock market go down, and then the real estate market went down, and then the stock market went up, and now it's at some unprecedented, some new highs, and then now you have that with real estate as well, kind of falling behind with the prices rebounding sharply. So I won't talk too much more about the market because we could have a very lengthy conversation about where it's headed. But I just wanted to give you a heads up on kind of where it's at right now. Because if you wanted to buy last month, I would have told you, oh, there's so many good deals out. You can kind of like lowball people and get amazing prices. And then that's sort of changed now, and kind of it's gone back to where it has before. Yeah. Okay, so a question that many of you guys might have is now a good time to buy? And obviously, as a realtor, I'm kind of biased to say it's always a good time to buy, but you know what? I'm going to try to be impartial here and kind of divide the question up a bit. So, is now a good time to buy? That really depends. So, why are you buying, right? Some people, they buy for investment properties. Some people, they want to buy just, for themselves to live in. So I would say if you are buying to live in yourself, yes, it's a good time to buy. Why? Because interest rates have dropped significantly. What does that mean? It means that that means you can afford more, because if the interest rate is lower, your affordability goes higher. And then also the overall interest or mortgage interest you're paying goes down as well. So you're sort of incentivized to borrow. And this is why the government has also dropped their interest rates to try to stimulate the economy. I think it's unintentional that they wanted the real estate market to rise, but this was sort of the effect. So I just want to mention that yes, it's a good time to buy, assuming you want to live there yourself, but you have to really answer these two questions. And that's, is your employment stable? So, a lot of industries are kind of, even if you so-called work in a stable industry, you still might get affected by COVID. Maybe your company supplies, I don't know, what is it called, like forks. And then now all the restaurants, there's no demand for restaurants. And now because you supply this item to restaurants, that may now affect your employment. So you have to really see if your employment is truly stable. The second is, can you afford the down payment, right? Can you afford typically 20% of the home price? If it's a $500,000 condo, can you afford to have to sink $100,000 into a real estate investment? So that's for if you're buying to live in. If you're, by the way, hey Kathy, am I going too fast? Like, do you want me to slow down a bit? I don't know what people's thoughts are here, because I can't really see the comments.
No, that's okay. If anyone has questions, they can unmute themselves and then ask a question.
Okay,
so
awesome.
I think we're
just want to make sure I'm on the right speed.
I have a question. I don't want to interrupt while you're still discussing this, but at some point you talk about what fixed and variable interest rates look like right now, and whether there is options to get fixed interest rates, and whether with variable interest rates you can expect them to really increase later in the future because they are low right now.
Yep. Okay. Sorry, what's your question?
Just what interest rates will look like fixed versus variable given the current state of the market right now.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah. So of course we're currently have record low interest rates. The Fed's kind of slashed them. I think it was like near zero, and then the mortgage rates have dropped as well. Are we going to see negative interest rates and then mortgage rates drop down even more? probably not, because economy seems to be seeing a bit of a rebound. So if you're going to be locking in a type of mortgage, I would definitely go for the fixed mortgage. If you could go for a longer period, because you would expect that over the years, mortgage rates are just going to rise. And if you have a variable interest rate, then you're going to kind of be eating a higher mortgage cost as you go down, by the second year, third year, fourth year, when things are rising up. Does that answer your question, by the way?
Yeah, it does. I guess I was like, I don't know too much about this, but I guess I was wondering whether you're able to get fixed interest rates right now, given how low it is. Is that
Yes,
even
you can. You can still get it. Yeah. Good questions, by the way. They're definitely a mortgage broker or a mortgage advisor would be able to talk more on it. I'm more than happy to recommend one to you. But yes, you can still get fixed mortgage rates right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Just gonna go back. All right. So as I was saying, again, if find a living, good time. Just make sure you have stable employment and you can afford the down payment. And I'll talk about other things you should be aware of after. Let's say you want to buy to rent out. You want to buy it as an investment property. I would, and it's your first time, it's your first property. I would say it's maybe not as good of a time to do that right now. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first being that if you're a first-time home buyer and you buy it for investment, you will lose all your first-time home buyer incentives, which I'll explain on another side. And these are incentives you really want to take advantage of when you're buying your first property. So right now in Toronto, we have a crazy low vacancy rate. It was like 0.6%. In a normal real estate market, you would have like 5% vacancy rate, 4% vacancy rate. But Toronto has been seeing like below 1% vacancy rate. So that's why the rent, if you guys have noticed, has just constantly kept going up. With COVID, however, there's been massive unemployment. People aren't consuming as much housing. If you work at a restaurant before and you're renting out a property, you're not doing that now. Maybe you move back to your parents. And similar with a lot of students, some of them are just choosing to take a year off and stay back in their home country. So a lot of the demand for rental has really gone down. And that means the vacancy rate has also increased as well. So the thing is, if you buy property for investment, ultimately you need to find a tenant. If there's not that many tenants out there, your place is gonna be vacant. And when your place is vacant, well, you still got to pay all of your taxes, your maintenance fees, your mortgage, and so it essentially burns a hole in your pocket. We call it cash flow negative during this period. And if you're vacant for a long time, it can start getting a bit dangerous because now you have to pay all these expenses out of pocket, obviously. The tenant pool, maybe you end up taking on a tenant that is not as strong, but you had to because your cash is burning out. And then to add things to the problem, maybe your tenant later on, you find out they lose their job due to COVID-19. And then you end up in a weird situation where you're not getting rent, but you have a tenant, and now you got to deal with the tenant as well. So I would probably shy away from trying to buy as an investment property right now. And I think, I touched on this in my last point. So potentially unstable rental income. It's changing a bit because, again, we're seeing a recovery. Restaurants are opening, but certainly, again, I'll go back to the restaurant industry because I think it's very easy to understand. A lot of the waiters and waitresses are not coming back because there's just, not as many people in restaurants. So there's not as much demand for waiters. And, the same has applied to travel, a lot of tourism, the hotel industry as well. And you can imagine that, a place like downtown Toronto, we're very dependent on these type of industries. So yeah, I would shy away from an investment property right now. Okay, so
can I just add something to that point, Lucas?
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest kind of debates that people have is, should I buy or rent, right? Especially for people who are currently renting a property.
Yeah.
You know, one of the biggest arguments is, okay, why am I going to pay off somebody else's mortgage, right? And when I can just pay off, you know, buy my own place and build equity into the property. So can you comment a little bit about this argument and what your thoughts are on the whole buy versus rent debate?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, okay, I'll just start with the rent aspect. Of course, I'm gonna be more inclined to tell you to buy because you want to own real estate. But I will say though, in the current market, it's great if you're a renter because you can find good deals out there. Again, because of the previous points I said, people are just not really renting right now, and you are kind of in the you're in the buyer's seat in a sense where you can choose properties, you can get good deals on it, and you know, a lot of the times the landlord will be like, oh, at least he has a job, I'll just take him or her. So I would say that just given in the current moment, renting is good. But in most other circumstances, renting is not good because really you're just paying off someone else's mortgage. So I do want to give that heads up in case, I don't know, some of you, maybe you're living at home and you just want to like leave your parents' place. Now is still pretty good time to rent. In terms of buying versus renting, you know, buying property is, you know, it's better because when you buy property, you're only paying rent to yourself and it's contributing towards your mortgage. But not only that, of course, your property is constantly going up in value, especially in a place like Toronto where there's just so much demand to live here. So of course you get to enjoy like the upside of your property going up in value. But not only that, something that a lot of people don't know is that when your property goes up in value over time, what you can do is something called a refinancing. And essentially you can refinance your property and draw equity out of your home and use that to leverage and buy a second property. So again, for all the finance majors out there, I'm sure we can have a debate on, risk reward, like you don't want to over leverage yourself. But you know, in a very safe market such as Toronto, as your property values continue to keep rising, you want to be able to, you know, pull out that money, and maybe you want to invest in the stock market. Maybe you want to buy a second property. So to have the option there, I think is a very strong tool. And basically anyone you know that has kind of like a real estate portfolio or they're a real estate mogul, it's because they're able to constantly refinance their properties, pull money out, and then buy more, rent out more, and build their portfolio. Does that answer your question, Kathy?
Sorry, yeah, it does. And I think the other thing to address is that, yes, you know, when you buy a property, you are contributing or building equity, but it's important to understand the additional costs that come with that, right? When you buy a place, it's not just your mortgage costs, it's your property taxes, it's your maintenance fees, it's your utilities, and so that obviously has to be weighed into the equation. But yeah,
no,
just a big, yeah.
That for sure as well. But yeah, okay, I'm gonna move on.
I actually have one question before we move on, like as we're on the topic of market trends.
Yes.
So I have the hypothesis that as more employers begin to support remote work in light of COVID, that would be less like sort of a desaturation of demand in the downtown, like Toronto area, for example. So less competition, meaning it'll affect the prices and that stuff. So I'm wondering if you're seeing that trend towards home purchases actually outside of the core because commuting is not a factor anymore for.
Yeah, that's a really good question. One that I have thought a lot about, and other people have brought it up as well. So I think in the short term, you're going to see, you know, until we get a vaccine, which is widely implemented, which could take a year, maybe a year and a half. Because obviously when we get the vaccine, there's logistics to implement, and not every country can get it at once. Not all the citizens can get it at once. I think in the short term, you're definitely going to see, less of a demand to be in such dense places. For example, do people really want to be in a 60-story condo right at Yonge and Bloor right now? Probably not as much. And I've had a lot of inquiries on, I want a 1+1. I want something that can be used as an office because I'm going to be working from home. People might start valuing other things. I want to be near a park as well. And I think in the short term, you're definitely going to see this sort of shift in the home buyers' behavior. In the same sense, I think once the vaccine is found, or this herd immunity, what have you call it, things are just going to sort of go back to normal. Because when you're downtown, for example, young people, they still, or even older people, they still want to have access to amenities such as restaurants, shopping. They want to be able to take the subway because you have to get to and from places as well. People, yes, they will be able to work from home, and you will see a demand for places that can that will help you help you have a space for your home office. But I don't think it's going to fundamentally change how humans live. And I can kind of think of one example where, during 9/11, where, there's terrorist attacks. There's a lot of people that are just terrified of living in high-rise towers. And people thought, we don't want to make high-rise towers anymore. We just want to make low-standing buildings, or I don't want to live on the top floor. I just want to live in the lower floor. And then just, over a couple of years, people seem to have forgotten about that. And then you're back to having all these high-rise buildings and this demand for living in on the top floor, building high condos as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so essentially it's like a short-term effect on consumer purchase behavior and could rebound back to normal.
Exactly. I think that, for geographical areas that are actually so you can completely do everything remotely, work from home. So for example, Silicon Valley, I think you're going to see a big drop in prices there because companies such as Facebook have already said, okay, we're going to just let everyone remote work from home permanently, and we're going to adjust your salary based on where you live. So you're going to see a bunch of their employees just spread out, a bunch of Silicon Valley employees spread out all across the US or back home to wherever they are. And then there's going to be less demand to live in the valley itself. And that's a function of they literally work in technology and everyone can work from home. But, in cities like Toronto, yes, a lot of us can remotely work from home, but our entire economy is not able to just shift to that. So you still will have, a lot of demand to live in these sort of downtown areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a good question. And I think that, in the short term, you'll see a big demand for suburbs, wanting to live in Oakville, wanting to live in Markham, for example, where it's less dense. But it's just going to go back to how it always has. Everyone's going to want to go back to the core neighborhoods where you have density, you have access to amenities, and you can actually go out and do things. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay, so first-time home buyer benefits. So I'm going to assume that all of you are first-time home buyers or looking to buy your first home. So these are things that you should definitely be taking advantage of, and you can only take advantage of if you're buying for yourself. It's your first time home and it is not an investment property. If you buy it as an investment property, none of these apply to you. Okay, so the first thing we'll go up with is the first time home buyer's tax credit. When you buy your first home, the government will give you kind of a $750 tax credit, and you can use this towards legal expenses. The second is the RRSP home buyers benefit. This is increased from 25,000 to 35,000. Essentially, you can take out. Sorry, one sec. You can take out $35,000 from your RRSP and use that to fund your down payment. So.
Okay. Sorry to stop you, but
yep.
we're not seeing your screen.
Oh, you're not seeing my screen. Okay.
No.
Hold on. How about now?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So the first thing you get is the first-time home buyers tax credit. The second is the RRSP home buyers benefit. So for those of you that don't know how an RRSP works, when you contribute money towards it, so I'll just use the 35,000 in this example, you can deduct that from your current yearly income. So if you make 100,000 and then you contribute 35,000 to your RRSP, then really you end up making 65,000 taxable income that year, and of course you end up paying less taxes for that year. I would talk to your accountant if you really want in detail what the best way to execute this. It's going to be different for everyone based on your income situation. So, but that's just a very simple way to look at it. You do have to pay this 35,000 back over 15 years. So don't see it as, oh, I can just yank the money out and never pay it back. And if you don't pay it back over the 15 years, there are some small penalties. And then the third one, which is the biggest one, I would think, is the land transfer tax rebate. And basically, if you buy a property in Toronto, this means that you can get up to $8,400 of land transfer tax back from the government. And for those of you who don't know what land transfer tax is, it's when you purchase a property, you have to pay tax to Ontario. And in the case of Toronto, you have to pay tax to Toronto as well. It does seem like a lot of money, and that's just because, again, it's the city, and Toronto implemented their own tax because they really want to curb off people like kind of buying and flipping properties in Toronto. And of course, it's just an extra revenue source for them. But again, if it's your first property, you get a bunch of this money back.
Is there is that a fixed amount, or are there certain criteria that affect this value?
Yeah. So what you can do if you want to calculate that exact amount, so the maximum is 8,400 if it's in Toronto. But what you can do is you just Google land transfer tax calculator, and then you click on the first link, and you can type in your purchase price, and you can see the scale of the amount of tax rebate you can get back based on how much your property is. The max you can get back is 8,400. So once your property exceeds a certain price, you won't get more tax back from that, but you still have to pay more land transfer tax.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Got it. So this is really important, by the way, to budget for, because a lot of people, they just budget for, oh, I can afford, let's say $500,000 property, but they forget to take into account what the land transfer tax will be. And it's quite a significant cost that cannot be amortized. You have to pay it lump sum upon closing. And sometimes, this can be, let's say, even like $20,000. So very important to save for that.
Lucas, while you're on the topic of budgeting for additional expenses, can you walk us through what other expenses someone can expect to have when you're buying your first property? So obviously land transfer tax is one, but whether it's realtor fees, what other unexpected costs can we expect? So if a property is, for example, 500,000, that's just it's not that simple. You're going to be paying more than that. So what other expenses can we expect to have?
Yeah, for sure. So you have, let me just stop there. Okay, so yes, you're going to have the land transfer tax. You will have to have the down payment. That's not really an expense. It's more of the savings you're going to need to have. Well, I'll just work with a $500,000 condo example. You're gonna have to buy the condo, put down $100,000, assuming you use 20% down. You're gonna have to pay land transfer tax, which is paid upon closing. Mortgage fees. This is gonna be embedded into your monthly mortgage amount. So once you close the property, you're gonna be paying, let's call it $2,000 a month that goes towards your mortgage. You will have to pay property taxes. I want to make a distinction here. Property taxes and land transfer taxes are two different things. Land transfer taxes you pay once and upon closing. So, when you buy the $500,000 condo, I pay, let's call it $10,000 on closing, and then that's it. And then property taxes are taxes that you pay every year. So so these fees can go towards the municipality, and they can cover things such as police services, paramedics, ambulance, schools, that sort of stuff. Typically, this will be 0.5% of your property price per year. So for a $500,000 condo, you could be looking at $2,500 per year for your property taxes. So obviously you divide that by 12 to get your monthly property taxes. And then if you're buying a condo, which most of you probably will as your first time property, there's also maintenance fees. So maintenance fees are fees you pay every month, which go towards covering costs to run the condo essentially. There's a concierge, you have to pay for his salary. If you have a pool, they have to make sure they run the pool, keep it hot, maintain it. The gym, having someone go there to clean all the amenities. So there's all these expenses that go towards running a condo that you pay for in your maintenance fees. So these are fees that you won't kind of know about if you've been renting. But the landlord would have been paying these maintenance fees the whole time. Trying to think what else.
Realtor fees.
Okay, yeah, on the term of realtor fees, in Ontario, the buyer does not pay for fees. It's embedded into the price. So in Ontario, the seller pays for fees. And of course, if you're all first-time home buyers, you're not paying realtor fees because you're not the seller. So I think that it's important to note that, because when you're looking to buy a home, that some people think that, I don't need an agent, I'm just going to go directly to the seller. But the thing a lot of people don't understand is that the seller, they have an agent 9.5 times out of 10. So if you go directly to the agent, he just ends up making the money from the seller for the whole entire transaction. And of course, because he represents the seller, you might think you're getting a deal, but then really the seller already had their own agent, so it doesn't end up really working in your favor. Is that clear? I don't know if that it's easy to understand.
Yeah, it's pretty clear.
No, yeah, that's clear. I didn't know that as a buyer you don't have to pay realtor fees, so that was helpful.
No, it's embedded within the price. Only these sellers. It really depends on the market you're buying in. Hong Kong, for example, the buyer pays when the buyer finds them in place, and then the seller also pays. So each individual party will pay their own. In Ontario, the seller typically pays for everything. Yeah. Okay, so I'm actually going to talk more about that later. Actually, hold on, I'm going to switch my. Okay, so it's fine. So I was actually going to talk about that in this slide, hiring an agent. So it's important who you pick as an agent, and this isn't, I'm not trying to sell in this. This is more like whoever you pick. I think it's really important because they could help you save a lot of money if you pick the right agent. So let's just start with it. What does a good agent do? So the first thing they do is educate you about the market. So sort of like what I was telling you earlier, the agent is kind of educate you on, in that neighborhood that you're looking to buy in, what are the typical formats that people, how people purchase the property, how do the prices trend, is it even a good neighborhood to be to consider buying in? So that would be really important. The second is that the agent is able to analyze your wants and needs. So, for example, I'll just use a really basic example. When you're buying a property, a condo, let's say you're the type of person that does not like to wake up early in the mornings. I think this is really kind of easy to relate to. Well, in that case, then you probably don't want to buy an east-facing property. But why is that? Is because the sun rises in the east. So if you face the east, the condo will tend to get hotter in the mornings, and then the sun will be shining into your face in the mornings as well. So kind of like forces you to wake up early, but that might not be your thing. On the opposite side, if you're facing the west, the sun is going to set there when the sun is setting when you come home from work. So the condo will be warmer when you come home from work. But if you're, if it's in the summer and you try to sleep really early, maybe it's a little bit harder. So these are kind of the small things that your agent will help guide you with when you're trying to look for a property. The third, again, is to steer you to homes that fit within your criteria. You have a certain budget, you have certain things you must have. The agent will kind of help you filter out properties, so they don't just send you things that would never work for you anyways, saving you time ultimately. Number 4, coordinate the work of other needed professionals. So I think this is a really good point to talk about because when you're buying real estate, there's not just the realtor that's involved. You need a real estate lawyer for closing. You need a mortgage broker or mortgage advisor for getting the financing. You might need movers to help you move all your stuff into the new property. You might need renovators because maybe the tap is broken or you want to change the flooring. And a realtor can kind of, because they constantly do this, they can help refer the proper professionals to you. And I can just think of one example where one of my clients, he wanted to use a mortgage broker that played on his volleyball team. And what ended up happening was 3 days before his closing, I don't know what this guy was doing, but he could not get the mortgage for my client. And he was getting very nervous because he didn't want to get sued by the seller for not closing. And I ended up referring a mortgage person that I regularly work with and that I have a business relationship with, and I know how she performs, and very easy was able to get the job done. Same thing with renovators, of course. You'll find, and this is not to talk down on the industry, but there's a lot of people in the renovation industry that can kind of pull a fast one on you. And of course, if someone is referred to you, that makes it all the better. Even with movers, I know I'm really going on a rant here, but with movers, you want to be really important with who you pick as a mover, because I remember one time my client hired their own movers off Kijiji, and what had happened was they came, grabbed all their stuff, moved it to the new condo, but at the base of the lobby, all the stuff was still in the truck, and then they effectively tried to extort her like $2,000 extra just to take her stuff out of the truck. So that wasn't very pleasant to deal with. So, having professionals aid with your transaction that are referred to you, I think are things that are really important. Number 5 is negotiating on your behalf. This, is a given. Your agent is trying to look for your best interests. So by representing you as a buyer, the agent's job is to try to get you the lowest price possible, or the deal that goes on your terms. Maybe you want to move in 2 months, not next week. And these are things the agent is able to help negotiate on your behalf. I want to make mention that on almost every real estate deal, there is 2 agents. One represents the seller and one represents the buyer. And the seller is trying to get their client the highest price possible. And then your buying agent is trying to get you the lowest price possible. And there's a lot of different kind of creative ways you can find things out to negotiate. Perhaps, let's say if you're looking at a place, your agent as the buyer sees random things that are broken. They can use that as a negotiation tool to try to get you some maybe a couple $1,000s off. There's so many examples, but I just want to highlight that the number 5 is probably the most important part of having a good agent. Number 6 is review paperwork and deadlines. So I think when Kathy had kind of approached me when she was doing her first purchase, she was seeing all this paperwork that she didn't really she hadn't really seen before. And so in that sense, you're kind of unclear with the documents because you can have all these conditions that you're unfamiliar with, maybe some legal terms that you don't understand. And the agent is able to help explain these things for you and also highlight things that may be important to look out for. And then number 7 is solving any problems that may arise. Again, as I mentioned earlier, like my client that hired her own movers, I had to go in and basically tell the movers that I'm going to call the cops. You better leave her stuff there. I'm only giving you X dollars. And you act there to solve these sort of issues that might come up, especially when you're buying your first home. There may be a lot of things you're unclear with, and the agent is here to help you solve these problems. Okay, so let's check if I have any. Okay, so no questions. Hope everyone's not sleeping over there. See everyone on mute. But okay, I'm gonna keep going on with the presentation.
I think there's a question in the chat.
Oh, there is. Let me see. Okay, let me look. Oh, from Gustavo. Is the land transfer tax rebate applied before paying, or do you pay the full amount and then get reimbursed at a later date? Good question. The land transfer tax rebate is applied when you pay. So, let's say you have to pay $10,000 in land transfer tax, and you get $5,000 back from the land transfer tax rebate. The lawyer will calculate this upon closing so that you only just pay them $5,000 right at closing, and that goes directly to the government. So you do not pay the full amount if you're entitled to a rebate. You just make sure you let your lawyer know that, yes, this is my first time. It's my first property, so they know to apply the proper credits. Yeah, no problem.
Lucas, hey, I have a question.
Yes.
So let's say, down the road, like currently I own a property, and down the road, because I'm not a first-time home buyer, but my partner is, would putting the property under her name, will we be able to get the land rebate back?
Yes. Okay. So that's a good question. And One that will kind of so it really depends, because your question has two parts to it. If it is just, so if you own a property and then your girlfriend buys one, and it's just her name on title, she's entitled to the full land transfer tax rebate. If you buy it together, then effectively she would only own 50% of the property, and she can only and the land transfer tax rebate applies to 50% of the property. So let's say you were the other person that owned said property, you own it and your girlfriend owns it, then you pay the full land transfer tax on your portion, and then she would pay her proportion minus her portion of the land transfer tax. So it's funny because a lot of people ask me that, like, oh, should I basically put someone's name on title so I can get the full tax rebate, so then I can save mine for later? And I think that by trying to save some tax, you are exposing yourself to possible legal, we call it like legal, potentially legal troubles. Because, you know, what happens if you break up with your girlfriend? What happens if, like, you know, you want to do something with the property, but officially you don't own it, right? It makes things potentially confusing in the event of a relationship breakdown. And it's typically something I don't advise doing just to save a bit of tax. Like, maybe it's a bit different if you're married, but you know, when you hire your lawyer, they're gonna say the same thing. Like, don't try to do things just to save a bit of tax, because if you're not officially on title, technically, like, let's say in this case, your girlfriend could just sell the property without your consent and take all the money, and you don't really have recourse unless you kind of sue them. But, you know, officially she owns the property.
Sorry. I'm going to clarify. It's in the case of if we were married. Sorry.
Oh, okay. If you're married, that's different. If you're married, then there's like different spousal rules that apply. So, yeah, you could just put her name on it so you can claim the full land transfer tax rebate.
Okay, and that doesn't matter. So, like, right now, my marital status is single. I own a property, but if you know, in the future, my girlfriend and I get married, and when we get married, when we're ready to purchase, it doesn't become one name, correct? I can put it under her name to get that land rebate. Yes,
okay. But assuming it's your marital home, okay, this goes into another conversation. But if it's your marital home, then if she wants to sell the house, she would also need your consent. So in that case, you're kind of legally protected. Although I really don't want to be giving you legal advice here.
Okay.
Yeah, Sean, I think that the key thing is, like, your ownership status of a house should never be determined by just saving a little bit of land transfer tax. And I think the key thing is, if you're buying a property as a joint partnership between you and your spouse, you know, your spouse who is a first-time home buyer will still qualify for her portion of the land transfer tax. But that should never be kind of the determining factor as to, oh, you know, we should put this house in only her name just to save taxes, because there's other implications of that. So regardless, she'll be eligible for her portion of the land transfer tax, and I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I had a good friend that did that. Just had his girlfriend on title when they were buying their first investment property together, so he could save his land transfer tax for later. And, you know, he's still with her, but the whole entire time, you know, if they had broken up, she could have technically just had the entire right to the property. He would have lost his down payment and whatever funds he had sunk into it, and he would sort of not have a lot of recourse. Again, it really depends on the kind of lawyers that are involved, but you generally do not want to get yourself in that situation. Yeah.
Lucas, we have a question in the group chat from Louis. Is it possible to put less than 20% for the down payment? And if so, what are the pros and cons for doing that?
Yep. Okay, that's a good question as well. yes, it is possible to put 20%, less than 20% down for the down payment. This is called a CMHC insured mortgage. And it's funny you asked that, because on July, I think it's July 1st, they just changed the rules. So if you are going to put less than 20% down and require a CMHC insured mortgage, it's basically has made it really tough for you. So for example, I'll just go over, sorry, one sec. Yeah, it's essentially before, when it would have been feasible to do this and borrow money for your mortgage. Now, it just ends up taking, like, you'll be able to afford a lot less if you need to have it insured. So for example, your it's called GDS ratio, your gross debt service ratio. Previously, you could qualify for an insured mortgage if it was 35%. Now it is, you need, it's jumped up to 39%. So you must have less debt when you're getting insured mortgage. Obviously, that means you can afford less. The total debt service ratios has gone from 42% to 44%. Again, this just means that you can now afford less if you need an insured mortgage. The minimum credit score. Previously, you could get an insured mortgage with just a 600 credit score, but now you need a 680 credit score from at least one of the borrowers. And they have now banned non-traditional sources of down payment. So for example, before, if you needed to borrow money from your parents for the down payment, you're not allowed to do this anymore. Again, this is assuming you need an insured mortgage. So it's made it very unattractive to buy if you have less than 20% down now. So hopefully that doesn't affect as many of you. Sorry?
So yeah, my parents are like helping out for us to get to 20. So if we're past 20%, and then, so we won't need the CMHC.
Yep.
So that, can we take the gift, or?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You have to make sure that they're giving it to you as a gift, and I believe they have to sign a piece of paper saying, oh, I do not expect this money back. It's officially a gift. And then the money, I believe, has to be in your account for a certain period of time as well. The mortgage advisor will advise you more on this. And then you could just use your regular 20% down payment. And then you wouldn't, basically everything I just said wouldn't apply to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna try to speed this up because I know people need to eat dinner and whatnot. So let's get back to it.
Sorry, really quick before we continue on, I just have a question along the same lines. I was having this debate with my friend the other day, and I don't know a lot about it either, but we were basically talking about whether it's better to put down a full 20% for your mortgage, or put down less and go for a larger place, maybe something with a second bedroom, and then rent that out and use that to help out with your mortgage. Can you kind of run through any pros and cons of that? Is that a thing people, tend to do?
Yeah, so again, a mortgage person is going to be able to talk about these more in detail, because it's like a whole other industry when you start talking about mortgages. But typically, you wouldn't do that, because if you have less than 20% down, you're going to have to pay what's called a CMHC premium, and effectively this ends up making your mortgage more expensive. So like, I'm trying to think of the easiest example to do this. So let's say if you had 15% down payment, your CMHC premium ends up being like 3 to 4%. So of the mortgage amount. So effectively, it really is a 18 to 19% down payment. It's just stretched. That 3 to 4% is stretched out over the life of your mortgage. So I personally don't know anyone who has even done mortgage insurance. I know it's an option available to a lot of people, but once you talk to a mortgage advisor about it, a lot of the times you're just going to be dissuaded because there's a lot of restrictions and there's a lot of like little fees that you're not really aware of, and because of the new rules, it really affects your ability to afford certain places. Yeah. So I typically would shy away from that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just move on. Okay. Okay, well, here we go. We just got on the secure financing page. Okay, so building on what we just talked about, this is probably the most important thing. If you're going to take anything away from this seminar, it's go secure financing and get pre-approved. What does that mean? Go, choose a mortgage specialist or broker. I'm more than happy to refer you one if you need one. And get pre-approved and find out what the bank is willing to lend you. This is going to save you a lot of time because, everyone thinks, when you're looking for a place, what are you looking for? And you go, oh, I want something that's 500,000. Oh, I want something that's 600,000. You don't know until you speak to a mortgage specialist, because a lot of the times people think, oh, I just multiply my income times 4, times 5. But did you know, for example, the bank will not count your bonus? So if your job is, your bonus is a really big aspect, a lot of times they won't count it, and therefore you can afford less. There's all these like little things that factor into how much you can actually afford. Maybe your credit rating. Oh, I forgot to pay my credit card last month, and then it tanked my score, and then now you can afford less. So it's so important to find out how much you can get pre-approved for, because it just saves you a lot of time, and it also saves you a lot of like heartbreak when you actually know how much you can afford, because then all of a sudden things become more realistic. And you're going to notice that when you buy a property in a crazy market like Toronto, when you put in an offer, most of the time you can't even put in a finance condition. So what is a finance condition? Basically, it's when you put in an offer and you put a condition that says the buyer will secure financing, and if they can't, basically they can exit the deal. So in a lot of real estate markets where the real estate is not really that hot, it's normal to have this clause. In Toronto, especially downtown, it's basically impossible to have this clause. And if you submit an offer with this finance clause, basically saying I need to go to the bank and get financing, they will literally like just throw out your offer and not look at it. So again, really wanted to stress that this is very important. And to add on to that, don't just walk into the bank and try to get pre-approved. Get someone who has a good reputation and is referred to you ideally. Why do I say this? Because when you walk into the bank, a lot of the times the person that works there, maybe they've worked there for 3 months, a year, 2 years. A lot of the times they're not going to be veterans and think outside the box. Because if you work with your standard banking rules, most of the time they're barely going to lend you any money. You're going to, and then you might get displeased and demotivated because it's like, oh, I have all this money saved up, I have good credit and all that, but I can't actually afford a place, so I'm not going to look. Like if you have someone that is, knows how to get deals done, has a good reputation for getting mortgages, magically you're going to find that your amount you can buy actually goes up by a lot because, you have, we can actually count this in. We can actually use your credit score from here. They can give you tips on how to improve your affordability. So again, really important, get pre-approved and pick someone that is known for doing a good job at their at pre-approving people. Yeah. Okay. So again, we're trying to up the pace now. Okay. Costs with purchasing real estate. So I think I touched on this earlier. So after you bought your condo, now what? Okay, so you need to understand your monthly payments. Your biggest cost is you're going to have a mortgage. And very easy, if you just go online, type in mortgage calculator. I think the first link is like TD's mortgage calculator. You just punch in your mortgage amount, the interest rate that you want to choose, and then it just spits out the mortgage amount. Really simple. Typically, what we use as a rule of thumb is for every $100,000 in mortgage, that you're borrowing from the bank, you pay $500 per month in mortgage. So if you have a $500,000 mortgage, you would pay a $2,500 per month mortgage. This is just, again, very general, like back of the napkin calculations. Property taxes, I mentioned earlier, property taxes is normally 0.5% of your property price per year. So again, on a $500,000 condo, $2,500 for the year in property taxes, divided by 12, and that's your monthly property taxes. Home insurance, this is not mandatory, but it is recommended. So if anything happens in your home, such as flooding, someone breaks in, steals stuff, which is not really as relevant for condos, then you are covered. Maintenance fees. Okay, this topic on its own is, I think, really important because maintenance fees range on every condo. You'll find the older the condo gets, the maintenance fees will usually go up. If you buy a condo that has a hotel element linked to it. So for example, I'm not sure if you guys know One King West Hotel, the one right at King and was it Yonge and King? Yeah. It's basically impossible to get a mortgage on it because what happened was the hotel improperly mixed their like the maintenance fees with the condos, and the condo maintenance fees are like ridiculously high. So no bank will touch a mortgage on there. So yes, you bought a property there, it went up in value, no one can get a mortgage, impossible to sell. So, maintenance fees are really important to look out for because, they can, if it's mismanaged, it can rise a lot over time. If you have a ton of amenities, but you don't use any of them, but then you're paying like a lot of maintenance fees, maybe you want to look at a condo that has less amenities, less maintenance fees. And I'm going to talk more on this later, but that's something I think is really important to look out for is even though you find a property that you're like, oh, this is beautiful, it's perfect for me, you might get dissuaded by the maintenance fees because, when you go to sell this property again later, if the maintenance fees are really high, people, they don't like paying high maintenance fees and it makes your property harder to sell after. Again, this is not something you have to worry a ton about because your agent can help you with it, but just something to make note of if you're going to be buying an older condo or one that has a hotel element associated with it. Yeah, I just need to check. Okay, so we're gonna keep going on. And my last point is, generally speaking, again, this is like pre-COVID, these costs combined, the mortgage, property tax, and maintenance fees, will typically be similar to if you rent out the same space. Although you probably will still pay more overall than if you were to rent. So back to what Kathy said, buying versus renting. If you buy a place, you do have to assume the landlord ownership, and it's going to cost you a bit more, and you're also responsible for these things. And of course, you still have hydro, you still have to pay on top of this, and you also pay on top internet, and most condos in Toronto, the heating and AC.
Can you clear this?
Embedded. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Hello. Can everyone see my screen?
Oh, now again.
Okay, got it. So, it's really weird. I can hear myself in my mic.
Yeah, I double hear you.
Oh, really? Okay, that's odd. Sorry, one sec. Just technical. Okay, I think it's fixed now.
Yep.
Okay, so finding your home. What do you want to look out for? Okay, as the new home buyer, what's important to you? Well, you're gonna want the nice layout, good enough amount of space, sense of value, convenience of location to work and schools. If you go to school or you want to walk to work, and the features and amenities of your building. These are things that I cannot dictate. I can give you guidance, your agent can give you guidance on, but ultimately there are personal tastes that will really depend based on your own individual needs. So what does your agent help you look for? Your agent will help compare these homes to other available inventory out there. You're gonna make sure that it's good value for the price they're asking, that the layout is good so that you can resell it for a good amount in the future, and then as well if there are maintenance and structural concerns. So as I mentioned previously, in the case of like One King West, your agent would give you, assuming they did their homework, would give you the heads up. Oh, I don't think you want to buy this because it's probably going to be really hard to resell later, and the maintenance fees are going to be crazy. Yeah. And then, okay, let's say you did all that and now you're ready to make an offer on a place. Okay. There's 3 components of an offer, and one ultimately is the price. And you want to make sure, and your agent will help you with doing this, that the price is reflective of the true market value of the home. So what do I mean by this? The price, sometimes the asking price, the seller is asking for a price that is, maybe way more than what the market value actually is. So even though you like it, it might be way too expensive. And the role of the agent is to, tell you, hey, this is too expensive. We should either, submit a much lower price, or just let's move on to the next one. This is really important because everyone that buys real estate has to sell it at some point, and you don't want to buy something and then, find out after, all the excitement has gone down, you paid too much for it. So that's really important. Terms. Okay. So, when you make an offer, you have certain terms which dictate, very basic things like the address, the legal address, when are you going to close on the property, and other, basic financial considerations. The biggest thing I want to touch on is conditions. When you make an offer, there's something called a Schedule A at the end of the offer, and this dictates all the conditions you are putting in when you are buying the property. So conditions essentially allow you recourse if something isn't the way it is when it's being sold to you, or it allows you to opt out of a deal if the home has a problem, or you are not, you're not feeling it anymore, and or you couldn't get financing and you need a way to get out. We also, maybe you've heard of this as, it's called escape clauses, and these are ways to sort of back out of the deal. I think I mentioned before that one thing you can have is a finance clause. And a finance clause, in theory, what it's supposed to do is give you time to go to the bank, get approved, and then, after the offer is accepted, once the bank says, yes, we're good to go, then, you're good to go on the deal, and then everything firms up. And the funny thing is, in Toronto, if you have a finance clause, all your offers just get thrown out. It's basically the same as like toilet paper most of the time, because no seller wants to let you buy their property and then back out of it after. That's the goal of the seller, is to try to sell their property. And if you don't even have your financing figured out ahead of time, especially for condos, which are, again, very liquid, very hot market, the seller will literally, they just won't look at your offer. It doesn't matter if you give them a very nice price, they just will move on to the next offer. So yeah, I really want to stress that. What do you call it? So, okay, why don't I go on to the due diligence part, because this kind of goes on with conditions. Okay, when you buy a detached or a townhouse, again, not very relevant in this aspect, because most of you are going to be buying condos. You want to put a property inspection clause into the offer. So essentially, you'll have a clause that says the buyer has 5 days to arrange for a inspection of the home, and under his or her sole discretion can choose to exit the deal. That's kind of like your basic property inspection clause. And it's when you're buying a detached house or a townhome, there's a lot of things that you can't see with the naked eye that a professional inspector can find out. So, for example, really old properties, sometimes, not to be harmful, but not trying to purposely be harmful, but they have asbestos in the walls, which, I think we all know that causes lung cancer, and these things need to be removed. And, if you find asbestos in your house, maybe it's enough to scare you off a deal. And upon finding this, you could use it as a way to get out of the deal. So very important to have a property inspection clause when you're buying a detached or a townhome. Although I will say, in a super hot market, people, they don't even buy it with a property inspection clause. So they will buy it no finance clause, no property inspection clause. We call it a firm deal, and they literally just pay the cash and then buy the home, because they're going to renovate the whole thing anyways. You can imagine that when you make offers like this, you have a lot of negotiating power, and it allows you to kind of wipe out other people that have all these conditions in their offer. But okay, why don't we talk about the condo? I think this is more relevant. When you buy a condo, you will usually not do a property inspection clause. What you will do is buy a have a status certificate clause. So what is a status certificate? Okay. So when you buy a so every condo unit will have a status certificate associated with it, which has a few things. It's honestly very dry, and I do not recommend reading it other than reading the own status certificate page, which is more simple to read. This is it's just a breakdown of all the condo files. So you'll have the condo reserve fund. You'll have a breakdown of what is in the condo reserve fund. So what is a condo reserve fund? It's when everyone pays their maintenance fees in the condo, let's say there's 300 unit owners, they're all paying, I don't know, $300 a month. This all goes into a fund, and then the fund goes, a portion of it will go into a condo reserve fund. The condo reserve fund is there to pay for things that might happen to the condo. So for example, if the air conditioner blows up randomly, you need to buy a new one. Well, it will come out of the condo reserve fund. Maybe some of the windows on the exterior have some cracks because they weren't installed properly. The condo reserve fund go towards this. You want to make sure there's a healthy amount in the condo reserve fund, because if there is, nothing in it, or sometimes in a really bad case, there's a negative balance in it. I've never seen that, by the way. This is just more if you do see that, then in theory, if something breaks in the condo, they can do what's called a special assessment and charge everyone in the condo to fix said problem. So again, if there's cracks in a bunch of the windows and it costs, I don't know, $100,000 to repair, that $100,000 is going to be divided between everyone and then charged to the unit owners. So very bad scenario. You want to avoid it. How do you avoid it? Make sure there's enough money in the condo reserve fund. Maintenance fees in arrears. Okay, this one is probably more common. When you have the status certificate, or when you review the status certificate, there will be a line that says whether or not the seller, the owner, has been paying all their maintenance fees on time. If they have not paid their maintenance fees on time and it's in arrear, the condo can essentially put a lien on the unit, and this is just not good. So you want to make sure that there are no maintenance fees in arrears. I remember a time when I was helping my client buy a condo. The seller is there's a lot of drama going on between the mother and the daughter, and then they didn't pay the maintenance fees, and it was in arrears, and the condo was saying, if this is not paid off, like, we're going to take recourse. So, I had to contact the seller and made sure everything was paid off before we proceeded with the purchase. And again, yeah, if you have maintenance fees in arrears, this last part, liens on the condo corporation. So liens on the condo corporation is, for example, if someone slips and falls in the condo lobby and then they proceed to sue the condo, it will show up on the status certificate that there's a lien on the condo corp. And, if you see one, it's a huge red flag. You want to investigate what's going on. You don't want, there to be someone suing the condo and then, they drain the reserve fund, and then maybe it causes a special assessment and everyone has to pay for whatever reason. Although that wouldn't really happen because the condo still has insurance as well. I'm just talking about situations where it would not look good once you review the status certificate. An ideal status certificate will say, no maintenance fees in arrears. Reserve fund is, let's say, I don't know, $600,000, so it's ample enough to cover if things break down in the condo, and no liens on the condo corporation. So it's good. No one's suing the condo right now. Okay. No questions. Okay, I'll keep going on. Let me see here.
Oh, I have a question.
Yep. Okay, I hear fire sirens in the back.
I'm sorry. 1 second. I'm so sorry. So how do you know how much is in the condo reserve fund?
How do you
know how much is in the condo reserve fund?
It will say it in the status certificate. So it'll say the condo reserve fund is currently, and then it'll have like a number there. It could be like $600,000, $1 million, $2 million. Ultimately, you want to make sure it's not like zero or negative, because then that would be a huge red flag.
So I guess the question is, if you already own the property, how do you know how much is remaining in the condo reserve?
You just buy the status certificate online. It's around, if you do the slow option, $150, or the fast option is like $200. And it's really good that you brought this point up, because in order to expedite the selling process, assuming you're a seller, you would buy the status certificate in advance, review it yourself, and then present it to any interested buyers. So in that case, they could not put a status certificate clause in there, because you're basically like, hey, I already have the status certificate. You can just review it right here. Yeah, so this kind of, you get what I mean, right? Because then you can basically avoid the finance clause, assuming you're in a hot market, and then you can avoid the status certificate clause. So you're basically telling people, I have all these files here, give me cash, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And
okay. Yeah. So
might,
it's always the
yeah.
seller's responsibility to like present this information.
It's not, but it is very, in a lot of times it would be wise for the seller to prepare the status certificate. Typically, the buyer will pay for it, assuming they have a status certificate clause. Yeah. But, you know, if the property is marketed well, one of the aspects is to already have the status certificate purchased and ready for review. Yeah.
But technically, if it's like a condo and a lot of people are selling, you could just ask someone else for that certificate, no?
You could ask them for the certificate to see if there's enough in the condo reserve fund and if there's liens on the condo corporation, but it will not state if there are maintenance fees in arrears, because that's specific to the unit. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So,
Thank you.
So yeah, it's a good question, because, you know, if you want to see in advance whether or not this condo has decent, what do you call it, like no liens and reserves, then it kind of vets the condo so that you're comfortable with buying it. But the lawyer will request one in order for you to close, just to make sure there's no maintenance fees in arrears. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, one last question. Is it fair that the place that I'm living in right now, it says that they use the condo reserve fund to unclog the recycling chute?
Yes, that's precisely what it's for. Because when you pay your maintenance fees, let's say you pay $100 in maintenance fees. Of course, it's going to be more. I'm just using it as an example. Let's say $80 goes to paying for all the ongoing expenses. You might have $20 per month that goes to the condo reserve fund, and it's there in place exactly for situations like this. You know, unclogging the garbage chute, fixing the window, fixing the driveway, stuff like that. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'll just
question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So for the maintenance fees and arrears, in your example, the previous owners had the sum still. So do they have to settle up before they sell the property? And if they don't settle, does that kind of go towards like the new owner of the condo?
Yeah. Yeah. You would. Let's say they don't pay it off and they're in arrears. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like, I would never suggest you to do this, but if you take it on, I mean, even your lawyer is going to say, hey, why isn't this paid off? So I don't even think it'll get to that point. But yeah, I don't think that's a scenario that would ever really happen where you take on a unit that has them in arrears. You would just simply see it as the buyer and tell the seller, hey, pay it off or else I'm not buying your property. And they're going to know to pay it off, and then they can submit a receipt to you that it's paid off. And then in that case, then you're good to go.
Got it.
Yeah. But good question. Yeah. Just honestly, review the status certificate and make sure that they're not in arrears, because you just don't want problems from the condo board down the line. Yeah. Okay. Did you have other question?
That's everything.
Okay. Thanks. So, okay, closing. Very simple. You close the property, hire a good real estate lawyer to execute your closing. Why do I say good real estate lawyer? Because you get what you pay for. You know, I typically advise my clients to, you know, if I can refer a lawyer, but if they're going to hire their own, just don't pick the cheap guy that kind of pumps out deals and doesn't really interact with you at all. The reason for this is because they might, you know, leave your deal to the last minute. And then in that sense, they just scramble to push out your deal almost like it's administrative. And then they're not going to try to look out for you and defend you. I don't know, in certain cases, maybe with the maintenance fees or like certain things with taxes, utilities, making sure certain amounts are credited. So I would say the point of a good lawyer is that if anything goes down, they're there to help defend you and resolve problems. Typically with a lot of deals, you're not going to have problems, but you pay the premium just to avoid having any issues if they do come up. Because the agent, your agent will deal with your deal all up until the point of the kind of offer being accepted and firmed up. And obviously they help a bit after as well, but the lawyer effectively takes over and executes the closing for you. And there are some things such as utilities that might be, let's say for example, the maintenance fees. Some people, they pay it in advance. They want to pay a few months in advance. So the lawyer will kind of calculate to make sure that you get your proportion, or the seller gets their proportion of the maintenance fees, and that they don't lose out on that. So yeah, and then just when you close, just make sure to set aside funds for closing costs, such as land transfer tax and your legal costs. That's your two main big costs at the end. Legal costs, again, on the cheap end, they can range from like $600. On the more expensive end, it can be like $1,500. Some lawyers, they do it based on the percent. They have a scaling rate based on the property price. I would say $1,000 is your typical cost. And honestly, you're going to redeem $750 of this from your tax credits for being a first-time home buyer. So just go with a good lawyer is what I recommend. All right, we're getting. This is my last slide. Okay, things to avoid. Number one, try to avoid very old buildings. The reason why I say this is because, when things are older, typically they break down. Things break down more frequently, unless you're buying like this ultra luxury condo, which is going to be very expensive to begin with. With old buildings, you typically will have higher maintenance fees. Maintenance fees, they rise over time. That's almost in every condo. The thing to see is, what is the trend of the maintenance fees rising? Very simple. What you can do is, if you're interested in a building, you just go on like condos.ca, and then it has a chart that charts out how the maintenance fees have risen over time. So if you see a bunch of like sharp rises, then it's something to be aware of. You need to be careful, because if you buy a property and then the maintenance fees goes up and up and up, and it costs you more every year, and then hey, when you go to sell the property, now what do you know? Like, the maintenance fees is crazy high, and people are now alienated or don't want to buy your property. Now you got to chop away at your price. Just not very pleasant to have to go through. Or it makes it very difficult for people to finance the property, because the maintenance fees factors into their mortgage approval amount. Something else, try to, now if you live in a very, again, downtown dense neighborhood, try to avoid a very low floor or a dark spot. Try to avoid a very low floor, because you can imagine if you have a very tall condo building in front of you, then, well, your place is going to be pretty dark, because even if you're directly in front of the sun, you're going to be towered by this giant building. The second thing is due to the noise. In a dense neighborhood, there's a lot of people walking around, especially in the evening, and then it might be hard for you to get some sleep, because you hear all this noise from cars or people just walking by, maybe talking loudly. The noise aspect, it really depends on where your exposure is. So if your unit fronts onto, let's say, Yonge Street, right, it's going to be considerably louder than if you're on the other side of the building and then you're fronting onto like a small street. Then even though you might be on a low floor, you might avoid a lot of the noise, because there's not all these cars driving by, which you would have if you're facing Yonge Street. I have a really quick and funny story. I was living at my friend's condo for a couple of weeks because I was really trying to explore downtown, and he was on the 3rd floor, and he is well, actually, I think yeah. So he's outside a TTC streetcar line, and man, like I was trying to sleep, and every 10 minutes you hear this streetcar driving by, and it makes a really loud noise, and it vibrates when it like kind of bounces on the tracks, and all of a sudden, there's like this giant blue spark, and I thought something like blew up in the condo. And what had happened was, and what had constantly kept happening was, when the TTC jumps tracks a bit, the electrical line will kind of like fall off and then click back, and it causes this big spark. And I thought, like, I don't know, I thought like someone's paparazzi outside, or like something just blew up, and something you might want to avoid, and you might not notice it when you're just standing there seeing the condo for like 5 minutes, and then you leave, and then you put an offer in. So just something to keep in mind. Next to the highway, okay, this is kind of obvious. The noise. You have cars driving at high speeds, it's going to cause more noise. Certainly with newer condos, there's a lot of technology in the kind of sound insulation that will kind of prevent a lot of the noise. But when you open the door, it gets really loud. Also, you can't really spend time on the balcony if you're near the highway, because obviously there's the noise, but also the cars kick up a lot of dust, and you're not going to really want to be spending time on your patio, like having a drink, if you have to inhale all these exhaust fumes and what do you call, like sand and whatnot. The last point, again, very obvious: location, location, location. Try to avoid shady neighborhoods, especially if you are like female. Unfortunately, we deal with realities, and if you're in a bad neighborhood and you're kind of like, especially because I get a lot of parents that are concerned for their daughters in to have them renting or buying near like a bad neighborhood. Just really try to avoid shady neighborhoods, because like you're not gonna have a good time living there, and then also when you go to resell, like there's not gonna be as much demand to live in that area. There's actually a good app. I forget what it's on, but you can also probably Google search it as well. You can just see like where all the crime reports have happened within Toronto, and then it'll just show up in all these red blips. Maybe there's like a grow up in the certain areas, or someone hit and run, a shooting. It'll all show up on this map, so you can kind of educate yourself on the areas and how frequent crime happens there. Yeah, so I'm gonna finish off with just a quick Q&A session. I know I've been here for a long time, and it seems like people are still on. I don't know if you're still listening, but if you have questions, now's the time to ask. Yep.
Sorry, I missed that. What was that map you just said at the end? I missed the name.
Oh, I had it on an app before, but I think you have to pay for the app now, because it was just in a kind of like a free trial version. But if you Google and just spend a bit of time on like finding like a free resource, you should be able to find one where if you search in an area, it just kind of shows up like reported crimes in like the different neighborhoods of Toronto.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Lucas.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Oh no, you go ahead first.
So one of the biggest takeaways is obviously to get pre-approved for a mortgage, so that you can be prepared should you find an opportunity.
Number one, most important.
What can people do to kind of stay informed with new listings? So where, are there any apps that you can go on? Can you get connected to realtors? Like, where would you go to look for listings?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is, would honestly ask a realtor. The reason why I say that is because most people, what they do is they go on realtor.ca or Zillow or these kind of online free websites. And the thing is, well, first it's delayed a lot of the times, the information. So it might be already sold and that you think it's still available. And then the second is because there's something called brokerage remarks, which only an agent can see on their system. We use a system called MLS, and someone that's just browsing online is not going to see these brokerage remarks. And a lot of the times, the brokerage remarks will indicate whether or not the property is priced at a bidding war. So just to clarify on that, you see a condo. Oh my God, it's perfect. It's good size. And it's so cheap. We should buy it. I get asked this, and 90% of the time I can, off intuition already know that it's purposely priced for offer presentation. Offer presentation means that everyone's supposed to go in by a certain time and date and submit their offers to want to purchase the property, and it almost guarantees always sells higher than the asking price. So while you see a $500,000 asking price, I see that it's offer presentation, and then we shortly find out later that it sells for 550,000, 600,000, or whatever it is. So I think it's something a lot of people get, like, it's a misrepresentation of the prices in the market. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question. I currently living. So basically the situation, I want to move in. I want to buy a house, but I'm reading those like Toronto Life articles that are like people sell their condo and then because of this whole COVID thing, they literally cannot find a house fast enough. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it depends. Like, where are you buying a house? Are you buying it
Toronto,
in like downtown or the city? Like where?
Like, it still has to be TTC accessible. That's what I'm thinking. But like, I'm hearing it's quite difficult to do it right now. So like, can you share some of your experiences between like people who are selling and then rebuying right away?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so first of all, you should always try to sell first, because then obviously if you sell first, then you have kind of the funds that you're working with when you're buying a new place. Some people, what they like to do is they buy first by getting a bridge loan from a mortgage, like from the bank, and then they sell their place. But I think when you start doing that, you play a very dangerous game of requiring to sell your price at a certain place. Maybe you don't sell at that price, then now you have to front out all this extra money because you already bought a place. So although it might be challenging, what you should try to do is sell your place, try to do it with a longer closing. And then let's say you do a 60 or 90-day closing, within the 60 or 90 days, then you go very aggressive into house hunting. Because at least you already know the price that you sold your house at, but now you have 2 to 3 months to look for a new place. And like, I would just suggest that instead. Because if you have a short closing, you can imagine that you're going to be pressured to buy a place much faster.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, so sell it first.
Yeah, like, I would almost always suggest you sell first.
But
there's
these
a rare
people
exception.
They're like they end up homeless. That's what these or maybe these blog TO and life articles are exaggerating, but they're saying
but
you sold their house and now they're homeless.
But again, if you sold your house, you're gonna have money to rent a place, right? So you're not really homeless. Like you're homeless because you don't own a home, but you're not like on the streets, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. But you have all the stuff and you don't own a house. So it's just like a long. Yeah, okay. But you still recommend selling first.
Yeah, I haven't really ever run into a situation where that has happened or even heard people complaining about it. I think you can always find a place. You just have to be really aggressive when you look. and maybe that requires you to take a bit of time off work, but if that's what it's going to take to find you a place, I certainly recommend it, just so you can get it done and over with. Yeah, I don't think that's an issue you should really be concerned about. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I know I've been talking for a long time.
Yeah, I got one, man. How you doing, buddy?
Oh, hey, dude. Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, so my question is, so in the event, like, let's say I want to buy a townhouse, and there's like a walkout basement that potentially we could rent out. I know earlier you mentioned if we buy a place with the intention to possibly rent out, we could lose out on the first-time home buyers incentive. But what if we live in it in the upstairs portion and rent out the basement? What does that count as?
So that should, I believe you can say a proportion of it is used. Actually, no, I lied. I think it has to be considered investment property, and then you wouldn't be able to qualify for first-time home buyer benefits because it generates income. But I can certainly look into that and get back to you. That's a really good question, because most people, when they buy first time, they just buy it for themselves.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, because I was thinking if there's a way to kind of own first, and maybe like a year or two later down the road decide to rent out the basement, like maybe if that.
Oh no, you can do that. That for sure you can, like, because you're buying it and closing on it as your own personal residence, and then afterwards, if you decide to rent it out, then then that'd be fine.
Oh, okay.
I thought you meant like you need to rent it out immediately, like when you're buying it.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh up both scenarios. Like, I guess, like, how would they know, right? Is probably the next question I want to ask. Like, how would they know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You want to let some time elapse before you rent it out, like, immediately.
Right.
But you buy it, on paper with the intention of occupying it yourself, and then later you decided to rent out the basement portion, then you would, again, I'm not an accountant, so you should verify this with them, but then you should be able to keep your land transfer tax rebate.
Oh, gotcha. All right, man. Thanks a lot, Lucas.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to end it there. Thank you all for joining. I hope it was informative. I can, what do you call it? I don't know what's the best way to. You can, you can either ask Kathy or me, or I think some of you should already have my contact information, and I can certainly help you with questions if you have any. Sorry, was someone talking?
Yeah, can you put the slides in the chat, please?
Yep, I can do that. I can just paste the link into the chat, and then you guys can ask me if you have any questions. I should be able to paste the recording of the seminar as well.
Cool, thanks, Lucas.
Okay, no problem. You're welcome. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was great.
Thanks, Lucas.
Yep,
See
no
ya.
problem.